Hi everyone, we're about to start the webinar in a second. We're just waiting for all the viewers on YouTube to come and join us. So once I have confirmation of the YouTube link, I will start the broadcast properly. So if everyone can wait another 5 seconds before we start. Okay, perfect. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar about breaking down barriers for female entrepreneurs in trade, a landmark webinar the Institute of Export and International Trade is hosting to mark International Women's Day. My name is Phil Adnet, and I'm a content editor here at the Institute, and I'm delighted to be bringing you today's webinar on what is a landmark day. Data from the World Bank shows that women make up a third of the workforce of exporting firms in developing countries compared to 24% in non-exporting firms, indicating that businesses that trade internationally do tend to have better female representation. According to the OECD, helping women exploit these business opportunities as well as upgrading women's production in the value chain could reduce adverse effects and maximize the gains from trade for women. So I hope you see the importance of why the Institute is running a webinar on how we can tackle barriers to trade that exist for female entrepreneurs. And as you can see from the slide, the theme and hashtag from International Women's Day this year is Inspire Inclusion, something that trade can definitely play a role in doing. To begin with though, on the next slide, it is my delight to welcome the panelists. Chairing the panel discussion that will begin shortly is the Institute's Head of Trade Policy, Hemi Bhatti, who is the Institute's Women in Trade champion and sits as chair on the Women's Working Group at the National Trade Facilitation Committee. Also for the Institute is the chair of our academic board, Sangeeta Cornera, who is also Professor of International Trade Policy at Aston University. They're both joined by Noreen Burrows-Cesaro, the president of the UK chapter of the Organisation of Women in International Trade, also known as OIT. And on the next slide, we have two further female speakers. We're delighted that Kate Foster is on the panel with us today. Kate is the head of international affairs at the Federation of Small Businesses. And last but certainly not least, we'll hear from Paula Bellamy, the managing director at OL UK. Good morning, everyone. How are we all?
Good morning. I'm really well. I don't know about the rest of them.
Really well and looking forward to this.
Morning and really well. Looking forward to this session. Thank you.
Brilliant. It's a pleasure to have you all. We're really looking forward to this panel discussion session. However, before we do get to that, though, we're going to run a quick poll to find out more about you, our audience, and also to get more of a bit more understanding while I run through the polling, where I run through housekeeping notes. So what is the main challenge you encounter in international markets? Is it knowledge about new markets, access to government trade advice, awareness of cultural norms in overseas markets, gaining international sufficient finance, or understanding and complying with new regulations? While we run through that, just some quick housekeeping notes from me. Firstly, you can comment with any questions using the question panel on the control panel to the right side of your screen. Do note if you are watching on YouTube, and there's quite a few of you today, you won't be able to answer questions, but please do pop something in the live stream chat and I'll get to it when I can. We do hope to be able to get to a number of your questions, but please do note we can't guarantee that all of them do get answered. There isn't a lot of time and we do want to get as much from the panel discussion as possible. In order to do this, I'll be prioritizing questions that have a wider relevance to a greater audience, so won't be going to company or sector specific questions. Also, one final thing, please note that if your questions are short and clear, I'm more able to read them. Finally, just to confirm, you will be receiving a recording of the webinar along with a copy of the slides in a follow-up email we'll be sending up over the next day or so. So I'm just going to give it another couple of seconds before I close the poll. just to let everyone, give everyone a fair chance to answer. So 3, 2, 1, and that's it. Thank you for everyone who voted. I'm just going to close and share the results. So interestingly, it's quite dead heat. We have about 29% say knowledge about new markets, 29% say access to government advice, and 29% say understanding and complying with new regulations. What do most people think about that? Is there anything surprising there?
Not at all. It actually marries so well with some of the information we're seeing and which we'll be talking about for sure.
Okay, fine. Thank you for sharing that. At this point, though, I'd like to hand over to Hemi, who will say a few words about the Institute's work in the area of gender and trade before we kick off with the panel discussion proper. Over to you, Hemi.
Great, thank you, Phil. So at the Institute of Export and International Trade, we have been committed to the cause of gender equality and inclusivity. According to the International Trade Centre, ITC, women-owned businesses represent only 20% of exporting firms globally, highlighting a significant gender gap in international trade participation. In the past, we have demonstrated our commitment to addressing this challenge through supporting the work of ITC SheTrades by showcasing and providing a platform for women-owned businesses. Last year, we raised awareness of women from marginalized communities in developing nations like Ecuador through partnering with them on a session at the WTO Public Forum. More recently, I have been appointed as the Women in Trade champion here at the Institute, and as part of my role, I have established the NTFC Women in Trade and SMEs Working Group, consisting of leading female trade policy experts and business leaders. The objective of the group is to enhance the role of women and SMEs in international trade. The UN Global Survey report on digital and sustainable trade facilitation indicators highlighted that women in trade was one of the least implemented areas in the WTO trade facilitation agreement, including in the UK. The group hopes to address this through enabling better access and support through trade facilitative measures implemented through HMRC and DBT. We understand the brevity of the challenges faced by women-owned businesses. The World Bank estimates that women-owned businesses face a $1.5 trillion credit gap globally, limiting their access to finance for investment, expansion, and trade. Enabling better access to finance for women-owned businesses is key in getting them started on their exporting journeys. The International Labour Organization, the ILO, reports that women-owned businesses face an array of discriminatory regulations and administrative burdens, such as gender-based licensing requirements and property rights restrictions, which impede their participation in trade. Hopefully, in this session, we can explore some of these areas in greater detail with our esteemed panelists. So next slide. Let's kick off by posing a few introductory questions to our lovely panelists today. So to start off with, let me pose a question to you, Noreen. Could you say a little bit more about your work at OIT UK?
Of course. Thank you, Hemi, and thank you, Institute, for organizing the session. It's great being on this panel. As you can see from the chart, my name is Noreen Barros-Tresario. I am the president of OIT UK. I'm also the executive vice president of OIT globally, so I'm wearing two hats on OIT. I'm also an entrepreneur, which is interesting because I bring the voice of the actual entrepreneurs into it. I set up Market Access in 2007 as a women-led business, trading internationally. We help businesses research and redefine strategies and activities to create offers and robust plans to help them find a voice in crowded markets and grow. And here I will add digitally and internationally, because those are two key areas which actually influence what I do also as OIT. So let me now introduce you to OIT. OIT, the Organization of Women in International Trade, is a global membership organization for women and men working in all facets of international trade. It's designed to promote the advancement of women in trade and business, pushing that door wide open. It is one of many business support organizations globally that support but also also facilitate opportunities for women in trade. It acts as a springboard for us, and it makes it easier for us to have that vital access to international supporting networks and markets. So as a global organization, we're a connector and also a collaborator with our strategic partners here in the UK and internationally, and in addition to the Institute, which we're extremely proud to partner with on many initiatives. We also collaborate with WeConnect, with Savitas, with the Export Academy, with the government, and then the larger organizations such as the ITC SheTrades, WTO and UNCTAD. We are in a unique position as we do bring our voices, the voices of women traders, into that global conversation, but also into the national one. And we highlight our challenges and we put forward recommendations for how we think policies and implementation, including legislation, can assist us to trade, grow and thrive. OWIT's global footprint is growing fast. We have chapters across the Americas, Africa and Europe. We focus on the professional development, capacity building, mentorship, sharing of information and best practice, training, signposting and support. And we also host and participate in sessions like today to help us prepare to meet for the future challenges. Wearing my international hat, OWIT International occupies a global strategic role, advocating for and contributing to the thought leadership, advisory, formulation, development and implementation of gender inclusive trade policies. We also facilitate the skills development and training programs for our member chapters and our partners. In the UK, we have 3 pillars guiding our work, and those are trade finance, digitalization and the capacity building facilitation. There's always the information on our events. We're very keen to collaborate with other organizations. So please do follow it both on social media and our website, owituk.org. Thank you, Hemi.
Great, thank you so much, Noreen, for that comprehensive overview of what OWIT does, but also your work with Market Accents. It's really interesting to hear more about that as well. So I had a follow-up question actually, and that was regarding what does OWIT UK identify as being major barriers to trade for female business leaders?
Fantastic. I love questions like this. So trade is not gender neutral. We all know that. We've been in so many conversations, and the obstacles which do come along, some of them are actually particular to women traders. Some of them are more common and they can be found within the SME and even the larger organizations. So as you mentioned, the number of women trading globally is not large. Well, guess what? In the UK, it's even smaller. Earlier this week, actually about 2 days ago, the Gender Index, which is another of our UK partners that we work with, issued their updated report. And this goes through picking up data from HMRC and other publicly quoted sources. And they've been looking at the local scene, and now they've just started to look at the international scene. And they have placed the number of active importing female-led businesses here in the UK at 13.6% and the exporters at 12.46%. These are really indicators. They are certainly not the full pictures. We know specifically that these are only businesses that are reported with data picked up by HMRC. There are the MESMEs that are smaller, that don't get picked up, are not showing there. Also, the ones that get paid in sterling rather than Forex and therefore do not declare international spend will not be featured in those numbers either. And there's a lot of digital platforms such as the Amazon, the Etsy, the eBay, where you will find a lot of women traders, and therefore that is skewing again all these numbers. However, let's go back to actual barriers, because that number is low because of the barriers. And what we hear from our members and also from a lot of the companies that we work with is that the challenges arise both from the way we conduct our businesses and the very nature of our businesses, the sectors we're in, the professions we guide, as well as sometimes the unconscious and conscious bias that is built into the system. And here we're not blaming any specific company. It is there and it is worked. So let us look at some of them. You've got situations arising from the cultural and social norms, where a lot of women traders find themselves being belittled, dismissed, or ignored in all male settings when they try to negotiate or close contracts. And this is especially when they're dealing with a lot of the cultures where they're all male oriented rather than having that equal basis, although this is changing as well. And then you have that unconscious bias and the built-in bias that works its way into the algorithms that make women traders fail in accessing what they want, be it finance or the resources to trade. So it could be along the supply chain, it could be in the logistics, it could be in actually getting the products to market, or even getting adequate financial resources, such as being able to open bank accounts that provide enough facilities to manage the required international cash flow, or trade finance itself. Being able to access the relevant up-to-date information, and here once again we go to the customs, the regulatory frameworks, the legislation, this gets difficult for a lot of women traders. Why? Because we fail to find them. We're not in the networks where it comes easily. So we're failing on a number of areas. We're failing the banking algorithms. We're failing in getting that vital signposting information to us. And sometimes we're actually failing because of the cultural norms which are working against us. Now, obviously, these are challenges. There are loads of success stories and many have moved against them. But in every success story, you're going to find that they still had to push and push and push to get there. It doesn't come that easily. And I'm going to just mention a quick example, which just happened now when I was speaking to this business last week. A UK-based women-led company producing very excellent brand of shoes worn by celebrities and personalities. Their production is based in Europe. They get the products back to the UK, and then from here they ship them out to some of their international markets or to customers. Somehow they wanted to change banks. They wanted to go to another bank, and they were approached to go to another bank. So this is already, there's the intention to move them. And guess what? They failed the algorithm to actually even change the bank. And this is a company with a trading history of a decade, and they have a good business flow. There's a good trading record. They've got the markets. They failed. Where did they fail? We don't know, because the banks haven't come back and told them where they failed. And this is what I mean by the unconscious bias and the conscious bias that is built into the systems and the algorithms. And we need to push and challenge it, because otherwise it's continuously being a barrier. And the intention may be there, as in this case, but they haven't gotten anywhere. All they wanted was a 50k overdraft to manage the international cash flow, to get the products from where they're produced back here and then back out again. So this is just an example to put it into perspective for the people who are listening. I mentioned signposting, and that is very, very important. We're actually doing a mapping exercise at the moment as OWIT UK, looking at the business support organizations that actually focus on women traders. And what we're finding, and I'm sure this is going to resonate with many of you dialing in, because funnily enough, it was very similar to that poll which was just answered. There is information and assistance out there. We can't deny it. But finding it is like walking through a quagmire. We need that adequate signposting to help the women traders find the information they need at the time they need it, and in a way that can be understood. It's no use telling me, oh, but it's out there. You can go on the website, and then it takes me about an hour of maneuvering to actually find the page, which then says, oh, give us a call. And then you get on the phone. Good luck to you if you manage to speak to somebody. It's a waste of time, which we don't have. It's a waste of an opportunity. We need advisors and support organizations that understand the businesses, understand our risk profile, because we're very particular. We tend to trade in certain sectors, be it services or as products, and the opportunities that we have tend to also be different. And they need to work with us to help us access what we need, be it the trade finance, assistance through the regulations, which is really, really big. And I must say, the Institute here is doing a fantastic job of upskilling and giving the information to be able to understand it. But there's still a lot of women traders that don't know about it. We're talking to the Export Academy. Many hadn't even been on the website to see what they can get from there. So I think, just to sum up a bit, I would say that we do need better support from support organizations. We need better signposting, because these are some of the challenges. And we need to actually bring more of these issues we face when we're going across cultures, be it the social norms we're dealing with, or even the networks in country that could be helping us to get there. I don't want to take any more time. I can talk forever.
Thanks so much, Noreen, for that, great answer. And obviously, it's a very multifaceted, challenges that women-owned businesses face in their exporting journeys. You mentioned the overlap with SMEs, and that kind of has led me to Kate, actually. So Kate, I was just wondering, from your work at the FSB, do the barriers identified by Noreen tally with what female small business owners in the UK are experiencing?
Thanks, Hemi, and morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. The short answer is yes, absolutely. They tally very closely with what we hear when we talk to our members. Just quickly, for anyone who doesn't know, FSB, we are the Federation of Small Businesses. So we are a business support and advocacy organisation for SMEs in the UK and the self-employed. We're an organisation that provides business services to SMEs, but we also campaign with the government in the UK and overseas to make the best possible regulatory environment for small businesses. So when I'm thinking about the barriers facing small business owners or exporters in 2024, we're thinking about several layers of barriers, if you'll excuse the mixed metaphor. So firstly, small businesses we know are struggling with cost pressures from all sides. Our most recent data shows that confidence levels are decreasing, operating costs are growing across the board. So that means that a lot of small businesses aren't currently growing in the ways that they have potential for. And then when you add to that the challenges of international trade, they disproportionately affect small businesses because, and Noreen touched on this, they have lower cash flow, they have tighter margins, and generally they will have fewer people. They won't have full teams with expertise compared to larger peers, so they have less time, less resource to navigate what can be a daunting, time-consuming, difficult, expensive process, particularly when it comes to taking that first step into exporting. So when you look at those two together with those competing costs, that has the potential to make trade a less appealing prospect. And we know that small businesses are underrepresented in international trade. We know that small businesses aren't making use of preferential market access provided under FTAs. So there's a whole lot of untapped potential there. And then thirdly, when it comes to female entrepreneurs, we know that women-owned businesses, women-led SMEs do face different challenges, and that's not to underestimate in any way ambition or strength or resilience of women-owned businesses. And in fact, there's research to show that women-owned businesses are more resilient in the face of the crisis. They're critical contributors to the economy, but particularly at the early stages of building up a business, I would say female entrepreneurs tend to receive less funding than men, and as Noreen touched on as well, they have less access into those really critical networks, the mentoring, the key contacts that can help you expand and flourish. And I'll just round off by touching on external demands on time for women entrepreneurs, women in business, such as caring responsibilities, being a primary carer, which is much more likely to affect women in business. In childcare particularly, it's a really important part of economic infrastructure. Childcare costs are rising, and that means that it's becoming unviable for some women in business to work, generally women, which means that we're holding back short and long-term economic potential here. So improving access to childcare is something that we're really passionate about at FSB, and we really want to help women into work and into their own businesses, because that can give you some more flexibility around those issues. So when you take all of those issues into account, it's definitely the case that female small business owners are facing quite significant barriers into trade.
Thank you so much, Kate, for kind of, highlighting the double whammy issues of being, an SME, but also a female-owned SME, and the unique challenges that women-owned SMEs face. In particular, obviously, there was a lot of overlap between the two, but there are certain challenges, like you said, whether that's childcare responsibility, work-life balance, access to finance, specifically for women, that seems to be more of a challenge. I was just wondering, are there any, services, or support that's out there for female owners, to kind of tackle some of the challenges you've mentioned, especially for smaller businesses? Yeah.
There are, yes. I mean, it would be remiss of me not to give a plug to trade bodies, not just FSB, but also the Institute of Export and International Trade, but others as well, which have a really, really important role to play in terms of having that vital connection with businesses and putting things in place like networking events, you know, building contacts, mentoring. So the trade organizations do have a really important role to play. Some of the major banks do have commitments around women in business, which I think is really important to helping touch on the access to finance point. And then, as Noreen said, that connection and collaboration is so, so important. And so organizations such as International Organization of Women in International Trade and others, there are things like She Means Business. I think it's those networks that are really, really critical.
Great, thank you so much. I mean, you know, like you said, that there are organisations like ours, like trade associations that are out there to support, you know, female-owned SMEs and SMEs more broadly as well. And then there are obviously, like you said, a vast array of other services available, you know, through the government and others as well. So thank you for kind of, you know, highlighting those, because part of the issue is the access to the services, right, and knowing where to go to find those services. So it's really crucial that we do highlight that. So I was just wondering, because, you know, we've all spoken as you know, organizations that support businesses, but I wanted to ask Paula, who is a business owner herself. So Paula, you know, does what Kate and Noreen described tally with your own personal experiences setting up international business and trading abroad?
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's really nice to hear the clear communication, because I think half of the challenges that you have when you're trying to find perhaps finance, when you're trying to find information, like Noreen quite nicely said, it's really difficult and it's very challenging, and that's for males and females. But females in particular, we lack a lot of confidence. So we think when we're reading something, we don't actually understand what we're reading, so then we give up. And that's probably the biggest challenge with women, that, you know, we'll give up and just go, oh, the man can do that, because the man always can say that he can do it, and then he goes away and thinks how he's going to do it. But us women will tell everyone, no, I don't think we can do that, that's too hard. Or we do put the challenges in front of ourselves, like the childcare that Kate said, which, you know, I'm a mother of 4, and, you know, and a business owner. It is possible. There are ways to be able to do things, and it's a lot easier these days with these types of calls. You know, I've still got my slippers on. I haven't had to leave the house today. So, you know, I can run a business, and I run offices all over the world. So it is possible, but you do need to speak, and you do need to hear from real women who have done it. And one of the things that I've found has helped with the barrier is, for me personally, is telling my story, one, and then listening to the reaction of people who have heard my story. And I'm like, wow, that's just my story. That's what I did. It's nothing special. But to another woman who's trying to start a business, that's exactly what you need to hear. So the thoughts behind logistics and the barriers in our industry, it's very much a male-dominated industry. I think people think industry is truck drivers, that's got to be a man, right? So that's obviously going to be something that's going to be centered around men. And the tradition hasn't changed in a lot of ways. You know, the clients will still expect to have a golf day. That's usually a male thing. They'll expect to go to an event where there's an ex-footballer as a speaker, and he's got all the lad stories in the changing rooms. You know, it's not quite there yet, but we do have obviously female football teams now. So we're turning it around slightly, and we are seeing female speakers at these events now who come up with different levels of stories, which are good for males and females. So I think we're doing a lot that we can, but I do still see a big divide between the company owner and the government. That for me is why I'm here, and that's a challenge that I've set myself on. How do I help companies find their way forward? And with people like Noreen and Kate, and who I definitely need to talk more to, I want to help women kind of bridge that gap.
Great, thank you so much, Paula. And you're so right. I think a lot of us face imposter syndrome as well, and don't, quite believe that we are capable of what we are actually capable of until we do it. So it's really important to have role models like yourself, in the world of trade, kind of being the voice piece for women-owned businesses, and inspiring others. So it's really important to create that culture as well, to inspire others. So thank you so much for that account. Sangeeta, Professor Sangeeta, I had a question for you actually as well. So looking beyond the UK, if we're looking at the global picture when it comes to trade and inclusivity, what are some of the kind of areas that are being touched upon internationally to kind of address, women in trade challenges?
Thank you so much, Hamita, and very nice to see the panelists, and what an interesting discussion. And thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this lively discussion. So, you see, trade, if you look at what trade does, is trade basically promotes gender equality and inclusive development. We know that, right? It can be a force for good, and it is in fact being used as a force for good. Now, at the World Trade Organization level, there have been this has been recognized, and there are several initiatives that have been undertaken at the multilateral level. So let me point out a few of these initiatives that are ongoing to support inclusive trade and to ensure that trade is becoming much more sustainable as well as diverse. So to begin with, first, the WTO has set up an informal group. This informal working group on trade and gender basically brings together all WTO members and observers. And the objective is very simple. It is to increase female participation in global trade. So the importance of including women and having inclusive trade has definitely been picked up by individual member countries and as well as at the WTO level. And the group basically aims to share best practices on removing barriers that we have been discussing. So it often forms a forum for discussion of these barriers, and there's a lot of deliberation that goes on as to how female participation in global trade can be increased. So basically, the objective of this informal group is to apply the gender lens to international trade. Another initiative that the WTO has launched is to set up a gender hub. And I'm really proud to say that I'm a founding member of the WTO Gender Hub. And this was founded in 2021, formally unveiled last year around this time on Women's Day. We were doing it. And the objective of this Gender Hub is basically to deepen understanding of the impact of trade on women and gender equality. In addition, the hub serves as a knowledge gathering platform where research is being shared. And in addition, we also have a discussion every quarter as to how and what can be done to address barriers. I would actually like to, one last point before I finish, is I would like to talk about the new initiative that the World Trade Organization and the International Trade Center has launched at the ministerial conference, the 13th ministerial conference in Abu Dhabi, which we attended. So we saw that there was a 50 million global fund which was set up to help women entrepreneurs tap into opportunities into international trade and also into the digital economy. And this was on the sideline, and it was a fringe event which took place in the UAE last week. Now, interestingly enough, Women Exporters in the Digital Economy Fund has been set up. And the aim of this is to help women-led businesses and women entrepreneurs in developing countries and least developed countries adopt digital technologies and expand the online presence of their enterprises. So clearly we find that it's not only at an individual level or at a business level or at a sectoral level, industry level, country level, but we find that there's a lot of rumbling that is happening on inclusive trade at the multilateral organization level also. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much, Sangeeta, Professor Sangeeta, for providing your remarks on what's happening at the multilateral level. It's obviously very important, and I think we're going to touch upon the digitalization of trade and how that's enabling accessibility for women-owned businesses as well. So I'm sure we'll continue that conversation after this next poll that Phil's going to lead on. Thank you.
We will indeed. Thank you, Hemi. It's been really interesting to hear about everyone's perspectives and just what the stories people have shared so far. I think, Paula, that was a great point you made about the networking opportunities, as well as some of the just the small things that you may not think of as a male member of an organisation, that you'd bring people in for, say, a footballer or whatever. That's just a small thing that's very easy to miss out. So that's, yeah, just a little tidbit I think I personally learned from today. But just because we're running a bit under, I'm just going to launch the poll. As a female entrepreneur or business leader, what have you found most useful when engaging with international trade? And if you want to click other, please do say in the comments. Professor Sangeeta, just very quickly, so you've shared your insights a little bit ago about what's been happening at a multilateral level. Could you say a little bit more about what the Institute has been doing with the WTO on this?
Thank you so much. Apologies, I was muted. Yes, the Institute has been actually doing brilliant work in this field. And we've been working in this area for over 2.5, 3 years. So last year, as Hemi just mentioned about the WTO Public Forum participation, it was interesting to note that the Institute participated in this forum, which was called "It's Time for Action." So clearly, again, going back to my previous conversation, the importance of inclusive trade has been recognized by the World Trade Organization. Now, the Institute of Export and International Trade partnered with the Permanent Embassy of Ecuador to the WTO, and they hosted a panel which was called "Catalyzing Green Trade: Indigenous Women Entrepreneurs Shaping Sustainable Policies." And interestingly enough, the panel focused on practical learnings in terms of what we can learn from indigenous and women entrepreneurs in which we can develop sustainable trade. So the focus was more on, there was a lot of focus on leadership and how collaborative efforts essentially support women to lead by example. And it was attended by indigenous women from the Amazonian forest, and it was absolutely mind-blowing, absolutely spectacular. And we have also been associated with various World Trade Organization initiatives like the Gender Hub, because I have been representing the IUE as a founding member there. We participated in the first gender conference also, which was held at the WTO in 2022.
Perfect, thank you.
So a lot of good things happening.
Thank you, Professor Sangeeta. So I am just going to quickly share the results. So we had about 43%, interestingly enough, saying that professional or business networks were the single most useful thing when engaged with international trade. So yeah, that is just that is quite interesting, I feel. We are running a little short on time, so I'm just going to very quickly go to the next slide. Just as a quick reminder that if topics like gender and trade are of interest to you, the Institute is a great place to be to have conversations with what can be done to tackle barriers that we've discussed today, whether that's to do with policy barriers or customs rules and regulations. Some of the benefits of being a member of the Institute are on screen now, and I'll share those in the chat. But that is it, quite enough for me. There's plenty more to discuss. We are running a bit short on time, so I'm going to hand over back now to Hemi for the second part of the panel. Thank you very much, everyone. See you shortly.
Great, thank you so much, Phil. So I guess we're going to continue with the questions to the panelists. So the next question was more around what Kate previously mentioned around, you know, the gender inclusivity in FTAs in specific. So this question is for both Kate and Sangeeta. When it comes to UK trade policy and FTAs, how can the UK government take a lead when it comes to gender inclusivity? So Kate, would you like to go first, and then Professor Sangeeta to follow? Thank you.
Thanks, Hemi. This is a really interesting question, I think, because it relates to the point I touched on earlier, which is that small businesses tend to not make the most of preferential market access that is available to them under free trade agreements. Now, this isn't necessarily a gender issue, but I think I just think it's relevant to the point that we're making with that free trade agreements are a really useful driver of bringing down barriers. They're a really useful statement of intent as well around closer working relationships, increasing trade corridors between jurisdictions. But the best trade agreement in the world won't work unless it's also accompanied by implementation efforts. So we need to follow through on all of the commitments that are being made in these free trade agreements, not just on SMEs, but on gender inclusivity, on Indigenous people, other vulnerable groups. So we need to be much better at making sure that those commitments are followed through on. And that could be as simple as signposting in a much more effective way, signposting existing resources. Noreen and Paula have both talked about this in terms of there is information out there, but it is very difficult to access. And sometimes you can find what you're looking for, but it takes a long time. You might not necessarily know what you're looking for. So I think that is a really critical part of FTA implementation, is that we need to get better at promoting the agreements we've got and making sure that people are aware of the opportunities available to them. The other point I would make is around a perception problem around trade, and also women's attitudes maybe to getting involved in owning their own business or international trade. And what Paula mentioned about telling her story really struck me, because businesses that I speak to say to me, well, I want to talk to other small businesses who've done this, and I want to speak to other small businesses who maybe haven't found it easy, but they found it difficult, and I want to know how they managed this, and I want to know what mistakes they made and how I can learn from that. So I think all of those networks and telling our stories is really, really critical to help women feel that running a small business, getting involved in exporting is for them. So I realize that's taken us slightly away from the FTA point, but I think it's really important to see FTAs as just one piece of the puzzle within a whole holistic approach to de-risking and demystifying trade.
Great, thank you, Kate. And yeah, all your points are really important. You know, FTAs, like you say, is just one tool in the bag, right? And there's a broader array of not just trade policy tools, but more widely looking at, you know, networking and building communities, you know, for women-owned businesses is so important in sharing that knowledge through osmosis and through, you know, discussions like these, basically. So Professor Sangeeta, I just wanted to get your take on this FTA's question as well.
Thank you so much, Hemi. Yes, as you know, there's been some discussion going on that, you know, women lead just 15% of businesses engaged in international trade. So clearly, and this statistic has been picked up by the UK government, and clearly they have been the first to acknowledge that it's important to include gender provisions within trade agreements. And to give you an example, such commitments and provisions have been included in trade agreements that have been done with Australia and with New Zealand. Let me just read out what the chapter on gender and trade equality with Australia says. It says, the parties acknowledge the importance of advancing gender equality for inclusive economic growth, and that gender responsive policies are important for ensuring equitable participation in domestic, regional, and global economies. So clearly there is recognition of the fact that we need to start thinking about the inclusiveness of trade. Now let me take a step back and analyze how is it that we got gender provisions within trade agreements. So the incorporation of gender provisions within trade agreements is a relatively new trend. However, they are increasing in number, and we find that more and more countries are coming up with provisions on trade agreements. But what is absolutely unique and path-breaking is to have a full chapter on gender within trade agreements, and this is what the UK did. So clearly, what is this telling me is that we view that trade is not gender neutral. That has now been accepted by policymakers because they've started including provisions within trade agreements. Now, it's important to mention here that the agreements that have been done either by the US or by the EU or by the UK, they all refer to the importance of promoting gender equality by supporting and advancing women's economic empowerment, because it has been accepted that including women in trade is morally right, and it is in everyone's interest. And hence, with this understanding, and especially the fact that the gender gap in global trade will take more than a century to close at the current rate of policy reform, it has been deemed important to include gender provisions within trade agreements. And the UK has been playing a very important role in that. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Sangeeta, for explaining that in more detail. And I wonder if we can also think about, doing impact assessments of these gender provisions in FTAs and seeing, whether they are actually having an impact on closing the gender gap as well. So can
I come in here, Hemi? Can I come in here with regards to the impact assessment? Well, that is talking about impact assessment. It will actually take a bit of time to be able to analyze how these provisions in trade agreements, or whether these provisions have had an impact on gender. But the issue here is, it would be great to do impact assessment, but the problem and the issue is we do not have data which is disaggregated by gender to enable us to do a solid exercise like this. Thank you. And we keep pushing at all international forums and at national and regional forums that we need to start getting data by gender, not only for women that are employed, but also women who are running businesses, who are exporting. And once we are able to get data along these lines, it will be possible to do some sort of an assessment as to how trade policy has had an impact on female participation. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sangeeta. And yeah, of course, data is crucial for this. I had a question around technology and whether technology, can help break down barriers for women in trade, or whether it's a barrier in itself for women in trade. So sorry, Sangeeta, Professor Sangeeta, the question is for you.
Okay, I guessed. Sorry, it seems I'm hogging up a bit of limelight. So, Hemi, how I look at this is that technology plays a dual role in the advancement of women in trade. It serves both as an enabler, and occasionally it serves as a barrier as well. And let me develop how it can be an enabler, but also a barrier at the same time. So on the positive side, we find that digital platforms in e-commerce, they basically empower women entrepreneurs. And we've been discussing about the the driving force that technology is when it comes to female empowerment. And what has happened as a result of women participating in the e-commerce ecosystem is that they have been able to break down geographical constraints, and they have been able to access the marketplace that they so far had not been able to. So in addition to that, let's also remember that online participation of women also facilitates developing their skills, because they are able to benefit from virtual training programs, digital courses, and an example is that of the ITC, which basically enhances their competitiveness. Now, another aspect that we've been discussing about is networking. And this was a question that was picked up in the poll as well. So networking opportunities can be expanded through social media, and through online communities. So essentially, these are the factors where we can say that digitalization has been a force for good. But let's take a step back and start analyzing how is it that digitalization may not always be a force for good, and how it can actually manifest as a challenge. And an example that I would like to highlight here is that not all countries are at the same level of of enabling gender getting access to technology. So there is a digital gender gap across countries. In some countries it is more, others it is less. In addition, I think very important, and some work that we are currently doing is on the risk of cybersecurity. Often we find that women-led businesses are threatened by cybersecurity concerns, because women-led businesses may not often be able to benefit or reap the gains of technology to the fullest, and often fall prey to cybersecurity and cybercrime. So in sum total, I would like to say, yes, technology is a driver, but at times it manifests as a barrier as well, because if smaller businesses, women-owned businesses which are small, which are not technologically savvy, may fall prey to cybercrime, and then the costs may be really huge. I hope that answers your question, Hemi.
No, that does. That's a very comprehensive answer, and it does kind of put everything into perspective when it comes to technology in trade and the benefits and the drawbacks for women-owned businesses. I had a question for Paula actually, and this is on how does one grapple with the differing cultural norms in different international markets when it comes to gender inclusivity in trade?
I'm just taking in all of this information that I've got, and it's amazing, because my mindset is slightly different. So having lived and worked in the Middle East for 10 years, and then also the UK, most of the questions that come to me is, why were you a woman in the Middle East, and how on earth did you build a business in the logistics industry? And to be honest with you, it's easier to do it in the Middle East than it is here. So I'll go right back to what Noreen said at the beginning, and how tough it is for women in industry here in the UK versus the Middle East. So everybody thinks that women are treated badly in the Middle East. Honestly, I don't know why I came back. I was treated like a princess in the Middle East. So you would go into a room where the room is full of men. I go to customs and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, how am I going to get to the counter, because there's all these men? And the Arab man will stand up and point at me, and I think, oh my goodness, I've done something wrong now. But no, he brings me right to the front and asks me what I need, gives me what I need, and allows me on my way. So it's very, very different being in the Middle East to being in the UK. In the UK, we're all treated as equal, so nobody stands out. So you have to shout that much louder to be heard. On the cultural difference as well, being in the Middle East, the rules are very, very clear. They're very black and white, so you know what you should do and what you shouldn't do. In the UK, everything obviously is arguable, so it's very grey and misunderstood and traditional. the tradition just comes back into it again. But when I'm hearing everything that I'm hearing, and yes, of course, I like to push women forward. I think the best company is obviously run by a man and a woman, because you have two ideas. You can go in and see a client, that client will gravitate either to the man or the woman, and then the other one steps down. I mean, I'll go and make a cup of tea for you if that's what you need me to do, because I'm in with a client. So the communication is actually more key than being a male or a female, and it's how you communicate in international trade. The things that happen, like you can say, for example, that vessel is due in tomorrow, isn't it? So hear that language. That language is terrible. If you're speaking to somebody whose first language isn't English, if you just said, is the vessel due in tomorrow, it's so much more clear. Very easy ways of twisting your own language because you're speaking English to everybody every day. But if you want to communicate in another country, you have to be really, really clear. So for me, it is about more of a language barrier when we're in international trade versus being a man or a woman. The challenge for women is us injecting confidence, us making them say that they can be heard, they will be heard. And it's not so much of, I don't want to put women in one box and men in another. I think we need to blend them, but we need the women to talk up in a room full of men. That's the challenge that I see today.
Thank you so much, Paula. And it's really interesting to hear your own experiences as well, in how you've kind of grappled some of these challenges too, but also, you know, the wider challenges that women do face. You know, and some of them are more kind of, you know, under the radar as well. So thank you for that. I had a question for Noreen, actually, on what advice would you give to women in trade, or indeed even men looking to become more engaged on this issue, or just looking for support from like-minded professionals in a similar position?
Thanks, Hemi. And in a way, I'm glad I've come after Paula, because a lot of what she was saying, the notes I had made up to actually say. And let's put it this way: communication in trade is soft power. It is the way you come across, and used well and used knowingly opens more doors than barging. And we know this, and that applies to both women and men. So what should you do if you want to grow and engage and become more active? Look for the supporting networks in your markets, in your sectors, and also in the markets where you want to go. There are going to be the cultural differences. There are going to be the language differences. There are going to be the time zone differences. You know, if you're speaking to Australia, you're up at 9:30 at night to be able to hit their markets, or Japan. So work it out, do your research, respect the cultures, and continue to push ahead. And also engage with the business support organizations. As we were saying, there are a lot out there. They want to hear from us. They want to know why we are finding it so difficult to get through. I mean, I mentioned earlier this week, I was on a call, a webinar like this with the Export Academy. How many of you people on this call actually utilize a free resource paid for out of our taxpayers' money, like the Export Academy or the trade advisors, which can open doors within the embassies in the countries where you want to go for? They can even set you up with the contacts and work out where you want to go. So I would say actually engage, communicate, be open. And, you know, Organization of Women in Trade, we work with both men and women. Our aim is to open that door, make sure it stays wide open. I don't want to see any doors closing. Professor Sangeeta, you were talking about digital and how that is an equalizer. If we're not careful, we'll allow the unconscious bias to stop us in a lot of them. And I was mentioning earlier on the algorithms which work against us. And Kate, you mentioned this as well in terms of how we can help. So the FTAs are helping us in terms of giving us access to new markets. There's areas there we need to investigate them and know how they apply. That is up to us. It is good to have signposting, and the government here should step up and let us know exactly where we can get that implementation to happen. And this is an area which I know they're going to be looking at to make that a reality. But it's also up to us as women entrepreneurs and as men entrepreneurs to find it, look for it. Don't expect things to come to you. We do need to be a bit more forthcoming, but the signposting is important. It's always a divide, isn't it? And a balance in terms of getting that through. And that's why, Paula, it works very well in terms of what you're saying. It's a balance in everything. But support services, look for them, look for the signposting, and join the networks. I think we're running out of time now. So back to you, Hemi.
Great, thank you so much, Noreen. So I have a final question for all panelists, and appreciate we're running out of time, so please do keep your statements short. But what gives you most cause for optimism that progress can be made in the areas of equality in international trade? And I'll go to Kate first.
Thanks, Hemi. I will keep it short. I think the fact that we are having these conversations is in itself a cause for optimism. It feels like we're no longer fighting to have things like gender inclusivity included in trade agreements. It feels like that recognition has been made, but now we need to move on into the implementation.
Great, thank you. Noreen?
Ditto. And get more support organizations cropping up and work closer with organizations like the Institute of Export and OIT and other organizations, FSB out there.
Great, thank you. Professor Sangeeta?
Thank you so much, Hemi. I think I would like to second Kate in the interest of time. Thank you.
Yes. And Paula?
Absolutely, this type of thing is amazing, even better if we can do it face to face.
Great, thank you so much to all of you for your great insights and quite unique insights from different perspectives, you know, according to your roles and your organizations, and really appreciate you know, all the kind of contributions you've made today in this very important and timely discussion. I'm just going to hand back over to Phil for any final questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. I will be as brief as possible now. We're just going to launch our final poll. Would you be interested in getting involved in IRENE IT's ongoing activities around gender and trade? I'll let that run for about another 30 seconds. Hemi, while that runs, do you have any final thoughts? Thank you, first of all, so much for facilitating this webinar. It's been really great and really interesting. Are there any last things you'd like to quickly share with us?
I mean, to be quite honest with you, our panelists have been great in kind of highlighting the key issues that, you know, women-owned businesses face on a daily basis. You know, and it is a combination of looking at the practical challenges as well as the, you know, enabling trade policy to become more inclusive of these challenges that women-owned businesses face. And as the poll suggested, like some of the areas that are the most kind of, you know, challenging and where women want more support is around building their knowledge of, you know, how they can export, where they can find these services for support. You know, accessibility is another key area. You know, accessibility to government services and to information and signposting. And then also around regulatory compliance, which again goes back to knowledge building and having a better and deeper understanding of trade policy. So I think it's a combination of all those points that everyone has made. So yeah, I would like to take credit for those points because everyone else articulated it a lot better than I did and are experts in their various areas. So I really appreciate everyone's insights today.
Thank you very much, Hemi. So first, as we wrap things up, thank you first of all for all of you for attending, both on GoToWebinar and on YouTube. I know we've run over a little bit, but thank you for your patience. Just on screen, you can see a little bit about our upcoming webinars whilst I do the outro. Thank you first and foremost to Paula, Kate, Noreen and Professor Sangeeta for their time, and a special thanks to Hemi for facilitating this webinar. It's been really useful for me and I hope it's been useful for the rest of you as well. Just a final reminder, if you complete the end of survey webinar, that'd be very much appreciated. To remind you, you will be receiving a copy of the slides and the recording, which will be sent out via email. Otherwise, a final thank you to everyone for participating. It's been really, really interesting listening. And the last thing I'd like to say is happy International Women's Day. Thank you very much, everyone. I'll see you in the next webinar. Bye, everyone.
Great, thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.